Hey, this is Anthony Davis with Shapeshift Wellness, and in today's video, we're asking the question, hey, if you're going to statically stretch and you want to gain flexibility, then how long should you hold a stretch for? So read the answers, pause the video if you need time to think, and we'll explore some research to back up the answer to this quiz in just a moment. Real quick, make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, and share this video with your friends because they might like it too. Also, stick around to the end of the video because I want to give some context so that we don't take this bit of research and assume that it applies to all people, all types of stretching, all the time. I want you to realize that there are times and places where maybe this research doesn't apply. Okay, so stick around to the end. Now let's check out the answer to our quiz. So the answer to the quiz, how long should you stretch if your goal is to gain flexibility? Well, pause just for a moment. And I want to say that if you've been following my channel for a while, you probably know I am not a fan of static stretching, and I am not a fan of gaining flexibility for no reason. In fact, I think flexibility is far overrated. And so maybe it's important that we reprioritize and seek other more useful goals like strength, or if we're practicing yoga, then maybe flexibility doesn't need to be the goal, but maybe in yoga we could have the goal of being more calm, of being better people, of being more able to relax, of breathing in a more effective way. Those types of things I think are more useful goals. However, if you're gonna stretch, because there is a time and a place for static stretching, there is a time and a place to increase your flexibility. So if you're going to statically stretch, the research we're about to explore would have us believe that 30-second stretching is going to give us the best results. They're going to have us learn that 15 seconds of stretching is basically useless, and that stretching for longer than 30 seconds does not give us any additional flexibility, and therefore stretching beyond about 30 seconds may be simply a waste of time for the goal of increasing flexibility. Okay, here we go to the research. Okay, today we're looking at a randomized controlled trial titled The Effect of Time on Static Stretch on the Flexibility of the Hamstring Muscles. I will comment that a lot of research on flexibility revolves around the hamstring muscles because the hamstring not only the hamstrings are a common muscle that people want to gain flexibility in, so it's relevant for people, but also flexibility in the hamstring is well correlated with general flexibility of all of our joints and muscles. And so if we look at, can we improve hamstring flexibility, then there's a decent chance that the research also is applicable to other muscles, other joints, and other flexibility goals in different parts of the body. Okay, it's not perfect, but it is more likely to be applicable. So that's why we see a lot of research on hamstrings. So let's start off with a quick definition here. Flexibility is defined in this article as the range of motion available in a joint or group of joints that is influenced by muscles, tendons, ligaments, and bones. Simply put, it's your ability to move a joint, not actively, but the joint's passive ability to move through a range of motion. So this article had the goal of looking at, if you want to improve flexibility in the hamstrings, is it better to stretch for 15 seconds or 30 seconds or perhaps all the way up to 60 seconds? And they compared that to a control group who did no stretching at all. Now, if you are a yoga person, you might expect that the longer you hold the stretch, the better off you'll be. And there are good reasons to think that. You might think that if you hold the stretch for longer, you might get some ligamentous creep, that the fascia, the soft tissues, might be more compliant over time, that you might increase the viscoelastic properties of the fascia, that you might decrease your stretch reflex, your nervous system might stop tensing up, and it might have time to really let go and relax and allow you to have better range of motion. You might also expect that you might have decreased sensitivity to stretch, and that you are not going to be as sensitive to the feeling of stretching, and therefore you are simply more tolerant of a deeper stretch because you're not so sensitive. So there are a lot of reasons why you might think that the longer you stretch, the more flexibility you're going to get. But this article calls that into question. So first of all, I want to point out that we are talking about static stretching, not dynamic stretching, not ballistic stretching, not PNF stretching, not all of these other types of stretching under the sun that exist. We are talking about static, passive stretching. Okay, so that is, you just take the muscle slowly to an elongated position where it's comfortable, it's not painful, and then you hold that position in the greatest tolerated length. So you take the muscle, you stretch it to a point where you can tolerate that sensation, and then you hold it for a duration of time. Now, the authors referenced another bit of research in their review that said, hey, by the way, there was some research before this study was done that said, if you stretch for 15 seconds or if you stretch for 120 seconds, it didn't make a difference. So is that true? Does it matter if you stretch for a long time? Well, they wanted to find out. So the way they did this was they essentially took 4 groups of people. They had them stretch for either 15 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, or no stretching at all. So there was a control group, which is great. And how did they measure flexibility? Well, at the beginning of a 6-week period, they took everybody here, they lay them down on the table, they take their hip joint to 90 degrees, and then they hold their knee joint in place, and then they extend the knee joint, straightening the knee essentially, and they saw how far they could get. And then after 6 weeks of stretching and at various time lengths, depending on which group they were on, they remeasured the flexibility. And the way they stretched is they put their foot up on a table, they just relax the leg, they keep their spine straight, and then they lean forward. And all they did was they lean forward until they start to feel a little bit of a stretch on the back of the hamstrings, and then they hold that stretch. One group held it for 15 seconds. One group held it for 30 seconds. Another group held it for 60 seconds. And finally, a control group did not stretch at all. They did this 5 days a week. And right here, it says that. So they did this 5 days a week, and they did that for 6 weeks. So we got to see some long-term effects of stretching, which is a really good thing, rather than the immediate effects. So what happened was that after 6 weeks, the group who stretched for 30 seconds and the group who stretched for 60 seconds, they both gained a lot more flexibility than the group who stretched for 15 seconds or the group who did not stretch at all. So holding a stretch for between 30 and 60 seconds was significant. It did give you a lot more flexibility if you did that for 5 days a week for 6 weeks. The interesting thing is that the group who stretched for 15 seconds and 0 seconds essentially had the same results. The differences observed between groups 2 and 3 and between groups 1 and 4 were minimal. So the group who did 15 seconds and the group who didn't stretch at all, there was basically no difference. There was a very minimal difference. So it didn't make a lot of difference if you stretched for 15 seconds. It was almost like you weren't stretching. And the group who did the 30 second and the 60 second, those two groups also had a very minimal difference between them. So it was almost the same whether you held that stretch for an additional 30 seconds or not. So this is interesting because we might expect that, well, if you held it for longer, you do better. And what we find is that, well, if you hold it for a little bit longer, yes, you get a lot more improvement up until a point where you don't get any additional improvement. So because 15 seconds of stretching was no more effective than no stretching, we must question the use of stretching 15 seconds or less. And that stretching 15 seconds or less may be a waste of time. That's interesting. So if you're not going to stretch for at least 30 seconds, maybe it's not even worth stretching at all. And then we found that, again, so this is a reference back to that article I mentioned at the beginning here, so there was that article that said that 15 seconds and 2 minute stretching was the same. Well, this article, this randomized controlled trial found a little bit different results. They found that, well, it actually did make a difference if you stretch between 15 seconds or 30 seconds. However, after 30 seconds of stretching, you didn't get additional benefit. So in a way, this trial was kind of confirming the general theme that this other article, citation number 20, if you want to check it out in the references of this article, they kind of said the same thing, which was that, yeah, stretching was effective up until a point, and then eventually it didn't make a difference if you stretched for a long time. So here we go, wrapping it up. Only a minimal increase in flexibility of the hamstrings muscle occurred by increasing the duration of stretching from 30 to 60 seconds. The use of longer durations of stretching therefore must be questioned. The results of our study suggest that the most effective duration of stretching is 30 seconds. So that's the answer to our original quiz. Additionally, we want to think about this. This is good news because if we're giving people stretching as homework, whether we are yoga teachers and we're just trying to help people increase their flexibility, or personal trainers, same reason. Or if somebody is I'm in school to be a chiropractor, so I'll be giving that eventually for people who are, recovering from injuries and things like that. So if you're a chiropractor or a physical therapist, we want to think about compliance. And if we give people, 2 minutes of stretching, that's a long time in a lot of people's minds, and they're just not going to do it. But if we say, oh, it's okay, 30 seconds of stretching is just as effective as stretching for longer periods of time, so just stretch for 30 seconds, well, people are more likely to actually do it, and therefore they're more likely to actually get results from it. Now, here's a bar graph. I like graphs, and the rest of the article wasn't very visual. So if you're visual like me, this is going to help you. We basically had 4 groups. We had a control group who didn't stretch. We had a 15-second stretch group, and then we had a 30 and a 60-second group. We see that the control group who did not stretch also did not increase their flexibility. Well, no surprises there. The 15-second group, it looks like they have an increase in flexibility. However, the difference between 4 and 0 degrees of flexibility and relevant to the amount of people in the study, et cetera, this was not a significant difference. So we essentially treat these groups like they had the same results due to the power of the study. So we essentially come away saying that if you stretch for 15 seconds, it didn't do enough for us to consider that meaningful. So you may as well have not stretched at all. It wasn't useful. However, beyond that point, so here's how good the 15-second group did. If you stretched for up to 30 seconds, we saw a significant difference. We saw a 12-degree difference in your flexibility of the hamstrings muscle. 12 degrees was significant. It was meaningful. It was enough to say, yes, I actually increased my flexibility. This matters. I did something. So the 30-second group was significant. The 60-second group also was significant. Interestingly, slightly less rather than slightly more, as you might expect. But the difference between those, again, not significant enough to really be able to say there was a difference. So we essentially treat these two groups like they had the same results, which they essentially did. So whether you stretch for 30 seconds or 60 seconds, you're going to have the same increases in flexibility if you do it 5 days a week, once a day, for 6 weeks. So let's make this matter for yoga, and let's talk about context. So a couple of limitations for this study. First of all, it was measuring hamstrings flexibility. It wasn't measuring, some kind of like latissimus dorsi or, some other muscle somewhere else in the body. It wasn't measuring your calf flexibility. So we can only, officially say that this study is relevant for hamstrings flexibility. There is a good chance it is reasonable to believe that the findings would be the same in other areas of the body. However, we cannot 100% say that these findings are relevant for other areas of the body. So that is a limitation. Another limitation of the study is that it did not have a group that was doing, for example, 2 minutes of stretching. That would have been interesting to see. In fact, it would be interesting to see a group that did 5 minutes of stretching. did they have an increase in flexibility? That would have been interesting to see. However, unfortunately, in the study that we just looked at, the 60-second group actually did slightly worse than the 30-second group. So that was kind of weird. Again, not significant. So, it still would be very interesting to see a longer duration of stretching. Also, I want to remind you, this was static, passive stretching. If you follow my channel, you probably know that I'm not a fan of static, passive stretching. So if you're trying to gain flexibility, then I usually recommend strength training, eccentric training, contractive stretching where you're using the muscle while it becomes long. So there are a lot of other types of stretching that I think are more effective, and that not only will you gain flexibility, but you'll also gain strength and motor control while you're doing the activity. So you get more out of it. So as for yoga, you can take this to mean that, well, if you're going to do some static holds and some yoga poses, you probably don't need to hold them for longer than 30 seconds if your goal is to just increase flexibility. If your goal is to help somebody just relax mentally, then that's a totally different goal. And if you want to hold the stretch for a minute or 2 minutes, that's again a totally different goal. And so you get to choose that. You get to choose if you like it. If it feels good to hold a pose for a longer duration of time, then that's fine. It's not going to increase your flexibility, but it might be enjoyable, and that's okay too. And then lastly, you can incorporate those other types of stretching, those other types of movement and strength into your yoga class, so that maybe, because long passive stretches aren't super useful, that we can start to embody other modalities within our yoga practice to make our yoga practice more effective for more things, more general health related outcomes. So thank you for watching. Leave your questions and comments in the comments, and like this video, subscribe to my channel. Thank you. I'll see you in the next video.